Today at the National Press Club, businessman and philanthropist Andrew Twiggy Forrest. The mining magnate and chairman of Fortescue Metals Group is now a firm advocate of green hydrogen and stronger action on climate change. Andrew Forrest with today's National Press Club address.
Good afternoon and welcome to the National Press Club Westpac address. I'm Jane Norman, a club director and ABC political journalist. Because of continuing lockdowns in Canberra, Melbourne and Sydney, I'm welcoming you from the ABC studios in Canberra. And our guest today is Fortescue Metals Group chairman and founder Andrew Forrest. The title of his address is Green Hydrogen, the Power of Now. The iron ore magnate is staking his claim in the new hydrogen era, investing big in projects along the East Coast, which he says could transform Australia into an energy superpower. Andrew Forrest, welcome to the virtual National Press Club.
That's right. That change happens in two ways, gradually, then suddenly. You only had to pick up a newspaper this week to know that fossil fuels' Berlin Wall had finally and quite suddenly collapsed. The change is now, and it's sudden. The only question is, will Australia be part of it in time to be competitive? Major new green hydrogen projects, politicians sensing the massive change in the wind, old media becoming new, feels like gale force winds to me, with those winds of change driven by you. Only this morning, the Reserve Bank Deputy Governor said, no matter the opinion of critics, the move to net zero is going to happen. And if they don't, the risk to local businesses will only continue to grow. All of us are now reading the signs, and the science know this. On Saturday, I announced the $1 billion build of the world's largest green hydrogen electrolyser facility manufacturing plant here in Australia, which will double the world's supply of electrolysers. Not in India, not in China, not in Europe, but in Gladstone, Queensland, Australia. The starter gun has been fired on the journey of bringing manufacturing at home roaring back, particularly to regional Australia. Up to this point, practically all our green energy, think wind turbines, think solar panels, have, like our diesel and like our oil, been imported. But I want countries, including most of all, ours, to take control of their own economic and energy sovereignty. On top of that great state of Queensland, where Fortescue Future Industries, or FFI, is making our first major manufacturing investment, New South Wales is also to receive the world's first green hydrogen energy import and export terminal, as well as a dual fuel power station, which will transition from a blend of green hydrogen and LNG to 100% green hydrogen as soon as GH2 supply increases. All from, I hope, after Premier Perrottet's announcement yesterday, from right here at home in New South Wales. Not from the Middle East, not from imported oil and diesel, not even pollution-ridden coal, but from crystal clean green hydrogen made right here at home. And let's clear that up, green hydrogen. We hear a lot about so-called clean hydrogen. It's a soundbite covering the fact it's made from carbon-emitting fossil fuel. It has carbon all through its supply chain. Sure, it's clean once it's hydrogen, but to get it there, it's dirty, very dirty, with heaps of carbon dioxide emitted in the process. But there is that other dirty little secret, the gas which is invisible to the naked eye, but at least 80 times more dangerous as a global warming agent than even carbon dioxide. Methane, the basis of natural gas, which is not adequately nor independently measured as fugitive emissions in fossil fuel. This sector is better off simply burning the coal, burning the oil, burning the gas than they are in hiding the emissions through turning it into blue-grey hydrogen and having our otherwise astute Energy Minister, Angus Taylor, misled into selling it as clean. Think clean coal. Think clean hydrogen. Think cancer-free tobacco. It all adds up to the same thing. Misleading soundbites put out by industries wishing to continue a duplicitous social licence to operate. And Australia has thousands of times more renewable energy than fossil fuel has reserves. So let's keep fossil fuel going, but only as long as we need to. And let's do everything we need to switch to a green future. Green electricity, green ammonia and green hydrogen can cover 100% of the world's carbon emissions. Let's not hide the fact it isn't clean. Let's not cover our tracks that we're not encouraging green hydrogen fast enough. Let's not put up walls between us and a green future. Let's just tell the truth. We'll burn carbon as long as we have to until we can get green energy into place to replace it. That's the truth. Sydney may well be known as the Emerald City, but our plan is to join New South Wales Treasurer Matt Keane and the New South Wales State Government in making Sydney the world's first major green city, the Green Emerald City, through green hydrogen. Once we're firing our own green hydrogen powered station into Sydney, our plan is to continue increasing green hydrogen production. This will be through a multi-billion-dollar investment to create 1 million tonnes of no longer imports, but green hydrogen exports from that old fossil fuel and high unemployment, but going to new future, to a new high employment future at Port Kembla in New South Wales. Further, to help build this and keep jobs in Australia, we're planning additional manufacturing centres beyond Gladstone for green industry components in Parkes, New South Wales, and again, of course, in Port Kembla. Australia can become a global green future manufacturing centre and energy superpower if we follow what the state government is doing here in New South Wales with federal policy settings. Only yesterday, New South Wales introduced the most far-reaching green hydrogen strategy in Australia with a $3 billion investment to kickstart a globally competitive local green hydrogen industry. But don't read just investment. Read what really matters. Jobs, jobs and more jobs, equaling economic prosperity as permanent in tenancy on planet Earth as humans. Again, provided we get our global warming settings right. We will not go down with the fossil fuel sun if we get those settings right. The increasingly rare, fear-mongering politicians thinking they might lose their careers by dragging yours down with them are thankfully in sharp decline. You know, WA can get a bit of undeserved flack by you unruly mob over here in the east. But a poll out only today, this is what I'm talking about, sudden, from our good friends at the West, shows that 80% of West Australians support net zero emissions by 2050. 80%. In a country where you can't even get people to agree if vaccinations work. 80% is huge. My message to us all is that Aussies, our people, our families, our workers, they get it. Even when interest rates turn around and go up, I also see a future of much cheaper home mortgages, home loans, and greater affordability for a higher standard of living because the world wants to invest in Australia. I see affordability increasing. I see affordability to light up your homes and highways, power our factories and farms, our schools, tech schools and universities all over Australia. And I see it all being done while growing our economy and while leaving your environment green and kind for your kids and grandkids. This is hard-edged economic choice, but it's also social and environmental rationalism. To the increasingly rare, thankfully, hysterical politician fear-mongering against choice, pretending to represent us, I just want to remind you, it's taken 50 years for fossil fuel to get the power bills down, and mate, they're still going up. In 5 years, not 50, you've seen the cost of green hydrogen halve. And mate, that cost is still going down. Oh, and by the way, as the gas price goes up, green hydrogen is quickly becoming cheaper than blue-grey fossil fuel, even if that fossil fuel hydrogen is dirty. Because what we're trying to do as fossil fuels, not the best mate like you, where you're clinging to the foreign oil and gas companies, playing cards with the future of every Australian, thankfully, you're becoming increasingly rare and isolated. You are denying Australia's choice. Every Australian has the choice of a dirty fuel or a clean fuel, an expensive fuel or a better fuel. Rare, hysterical politicians trying to scare us all, don't do that. Open the future to every Australian. Give us the choice. A fuel that you can make right here in Australia, clean as the day is long and made by hard-working locals, not by foreign companies controlling our standard of living at their whim, thanks to your fear. I've heard your rallying cries of deception, that Australia's sold out its economic and energy sovereignty, but it's you, the occasional now laggard politician, standing on the hose, stopping us from getting our own economic and energy sovereignty back with our own homemade green hydrogen. And as you've probably worked out by now, that's only going to happen if we produce the energy here cheaper than anywhere else. Those declining power bills are and will continue to be driven by hundreds of thousands of new jobs using the exact skills we already have in the oil, gas and coal sectors. And these sectors are declining because, at the end of the day, we're harnessing Australian wind and Australian sunshine, both with a marginal cost of zero. And nothing's less expensive than that. Moving on from these increasingly, thankfully, lonely politicians, I see the workers' careers from the fossil fuel sector to be as green and as permanent as your children's futures, and even brighter, but unlike ours, even cleaner. And I ask every Australian to dismiss those who are willfully blind to that certain future. There are none so blind as those that will not see. Most of these massive job creation sites that I've talked about will be in the bush. But let me talk to you about the first one in the city. This week I announced plans to convert one of Australia's largest fossil fuel ammonia factories in Brisbane to run on green hydrogen. It produces exactly the same molecules, but there's no carbon and much worse methane in its production. This will be a breakthrough, creating Australia's first green fertilisers and bringing down their cost for our hard-working farmers. That ammonia will also provide renewable, pollution-free energy to the ships which pass the port of Brisbane or Sydney every hour. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the future. What you're seeing here is economic and energy independent sovereignty being brought right back to Australia. Our green hydrogen, our green ammonia and our green fertilisers will not be determined by what Saudi Arabia or Russia, in a good mood or not, might cosily collude what the price might be, which impacts currently the lifestyle of every Australian. Let's bring our sovereignty home. Let's not stand in the road of that. This is Australia for Australia. We're making our own energy down the road with jobs next door, not overseas. Please think of that when you see a hysterical Chicken Little politician on Carl and Ali's Today Show clucking about energy security and doing absolutely nothing about it. Which brings me to someone who doesn't claim the sky is falling and whose eyes are firmly set on the future of seeing her career and 400 of her colleagues prosper at that ammonia plant I spoke of in Brisbane. Christy Rossi, Incitec Pivot's Young Facilities Supervisor. On Monday, we walked together through that plant and Christy explained that green hydrogen as the new feed to this old fossil fuel plant had not only given the entire workforce a lift in morale, but removed the dark clouds of career uncertainty, which is faced by all those now in the fossil fuel sector. From Christy Rossi to Rupert Murdoch, we can all read the writing on the wall. Following on the heels of our major announcements this week, News Corp, for so long with a questionable attitude to climate change, launched an aggressive campaign for net zero emissions. They call it Mission Zero. There was a 16-page wraparound and front-page splashes on all of its Australian mastheads, which featured the very same miners, like me, and very same farmers, like me, but we're not standing on the hose. We're calling for carbon-neutral, renewable, exciting new futures for our kids, for us, for our country. I welcome all the great journalists from News Corp and Rupert and Lachlan. We're delighted and very relieved that you've joined the fray. Your arrival, ladies and gentlemen, is just in time. The major battles of greenwashing, threats, and deeply wrong and obviously unsubstantiated claims from the fossil fuel sector are still in front of us. The ambushes are ahead and we must be ready for them. But News Corp wasn't the only change in the wind this week. Members of the National Party also called for multi-billion-dollar green investment in regional Australia. Oh, absolutely, we're going to do that. But them calling for it was unthinkable only days ago. So I'm delighted that all states and territories in Australia have a net zero target, every one of us, every state, every territory, by 2050. But Australia as a nation still does not. And that, for me, is an enormous concern. Today, if I only have one message, it's that a national target of carbon neutrality is regional Australia's jobs and economic opportunity, but only if Australians trust the good politicians not holding them back and move. And what's so important about moving now? Simply that we rely right now on other countries to buy our goods, to buy our services and finance our huge projects that are the very basis that we have the high standard of living that we enjoy. But they do it on the quid pro quo, that we meet international standards. Fair enough. Fair cop. Our global customers and financiers have a choice, just like us. And they'll make that choice in only 2 weeks' time at COP26 Glasgow. If we miss declaring carbon neutrality at COP26, we'll eventually be forced to make it anyway, just as the Reserve Bank observed today. But by then, our markets and our financings will dry up. And the stain that leaves, that we simply didn't care, that we ignored our youth, we got the politicians we deserved, will count against us forever. And that's not fear-mongering. We are, as Fortescue and other big companies, are watching international investors pulling the pin on Australian projects now. Can you blame them? They want a world which doesn't cook. It's no conspiracy, mate. They're just fund managers trying to make a dollar for their own punters. They've made a rational economic judgment that those countries with a COP26 carbon neutral commitment are much better investments than those without it. As an economic rationalist, I can see their logic. But so does half the world's investable capital, controlling $120 trillion worth of assets. They have committed to not finance companies and governments like ours without a 2050 carbon neutrality target. But let's go back to regional Australia. It got cracking on the wool boom. Dad remembers it really well. As you all know, Australia rode to success on the sheep's back, but polyester and plastic ended that boom. And so being a lad from pastoral WA, I know a little something in the mining industry about booms. But this is the best boom we'll ever have, as there will be no bust. Renewable energy will never end. Regional Australia could become one of the big players that will be the biggest industry in the world, one that is predicted to grow at a rate of US $2.5 trillion per year. There's not an industry in the world that will ever match that. That Australia, that regional Australia, can be our industry. So I say to all workers in fossil fuel industries, it doesn't matter what your skills are, whatever they are, the new era of a green future needs your skills. And I say to all small investors and all in small business across Australia, you who really drive our economy and you who really drive our employment, the renewable future is for you. It will be working and working through you that we bring our economic and energy sovereignty back to our country. Imagine for a moment just one idea being considered by ourselves in Macquarie Bank. Instead of just driving past BP, Shell and Mobil stations on our highways, we could become a self-sufficient nation of entrepreneurs who make, not import, the fuel that fills your car or the Lynn Fox passing truck. Imagine filling up at your mate Greg's place in Tamworth, or Steve's place in Kalgoorlie, or Julie's place in Gladstone, or any other regional town where they make green hydrogen right there at the station next to the highway from wind and sunshine around the corner using Australian manufactured components. Now compare that to what we currently do, which is import over 90% of our fuel from the Middle East, Asia and Africa with imported products, leaving our energy security and our standard of living in their hands. Australians deserve economic choices and to bring our energy and economic sovereignty back home. Committing to carbon neutrality, driving our renewable energy sector at COP26 will release massive investment generating those choices. And the number of jobs created will dwarf the current coal mining workforce, which, as the Courier Mail in Brisbane pointed out only a few days ago, is actually smaller than the number of workers at Bunnings. Creating choices for all of those coal workers. But, fellow Australians, timing is critical. As other countries, and I've been to them, over 50, I got COVID in the process. This was not easy. We travelled all through the pandemic, but I can tell you with my own eyes, they have similar natural advantages to Australia, but they are not dithering. Both personally and through FFI, from what I've seen, I am convinced that Australia has a magnificent future, and I'm backing it into renewable energy. I'm backing the careers, I'm backing the jobs of my fellow Australians. I'm putting billions of dollars on the line in the regions, and only just this week I made those declarations. So please, judge what a person does occasionally, but trust what judge what a person says occasionally, but trust what they do. The iron ore company, a huge heavy industry, heavy manufacturing, heavy carbon emitting company I founded, committed to net zero not by 2050, but by 2030. That's why years ago we decided to turn Fortescue into a major green energy and green industry giant, a business that can create the technology and the jobs and the careers and decarbonise heavy industry, starting at home with us, spreading out across Australia, and then industry worldwide. We heavy emitting manufacturing sector globally, we're that huge piece of the emission reductions puzzle you don't hear that much about. We call this new company Fortescue Future Industries, and I've never been more committed to any other professional endeavour nor greater challenge in my own life. It was at the time a totally radical idea, but as my family and friends will tell you, anticipating and relishing challenges is, I suppose, a little in my character. And climate change is our own, every Australian's, collective greatest challenge. The fossil fuel industry has created the idea that fixing climate change is a personal responsibility. This kind of follows the lie of the plastics industry, that you throwing plastic away is your problem. Them giving you no choice but to consume in plastic doesn't even get mentioned. Some politicians and the fossil fuel sector would like you also to have no choice. Just consume the fossil fuel from fossil fuel. Pooh. I say that's not good enough. I want to give you that choice, a dirty fuel or a clean fuel, and just as economically competitive. The elephant in the room is the heavy emitters. We have to act. Mums and dads who are forced to consume fossil fuel, mums and dads, I know you're being forced to consume fossil fuel because we have nothing else, but you're not responsible for global warming. It's the oil and gas companies who gave us no choice and the politicians who followed them. So let's look at my industry. It isn't pretty. Heavy industry accounts for over a quarter of all our global emissions. The Scope 3 emissions of the top 4 iron ore companies, what the customers of Fortescue, BHP, Vale and Rio Tinto emit, are equivalent to Russia's entire national emissions. That's because our steel mill clients use coal to turn the iron ore into steel. It's coal that's the problem. But we, the iron ore producers, must take the rap until we give them a choice too. Demand for steel will continue to rise, and the people who buy steel will increasingly, I hope, require that it's green and zero emissions. Steel makers, in turn, will feel a squeeze and will put pressure on iron ore companies such as my own to produce green iron ore. I love that, and it's just the beginning of the pressure. The solution lies in green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is an energy carrier, but unlike fossil fuels, it's becoming cheaper, and it will never run out. And of course, we won't cook the planet. It's also a gas, which means it's compatible with our way of life. Highway fuel stations with the same looking Bowsers. But cars that are quicker to fill up. Cars that look exactly like our old ones, but generate hardly any noise, and of course, no exhaust. And to make green hydrogen, you simply split water, any old water. It can be wastewater, desalinated water, seawater, into hydrogen and oxygen using renewable electricity only. It's like a miracle molecule, the Swiss Army knife of energy and green products, versatile and able to decarbonise even the most challenging sectors like, say, iron ore, cement, steel, iron, fertilisers, aeroplanes, trucks, trains, cars. There's no end to the miracle molecule solution. Let's get after it. Even if you have a gas pipeline, you just chuck the hydrogen into the pipeline. If you want to get it overseas today, you can turn it into ammonia. Look outside your window. There are ammonia trucks going up and down the highway and ammonia ships going up and down our coast. It's a routine and established industry. And like we truck liquid hydrogen all over the place, it won't be long before we can ship that too. And let me remind you, it was only a few decades ago that people said shipping LNG was impossible. But right now, it's one of the most shipped commodities in the world, and we are planning for green hydrogen to be the most shipped commodity in the world. Yeah, you probably all heard about the energy crisis in Europe, and some are trying to blame green energy and the like, but can I tell you, Russia's turning off the spigot. And that extortionate gas price is predictable when that happens. If Europe had green hydrogen made down the road, it wouldn't be a problem because green hydrogen can be made everywhere, and it's like a battery. It stores renewable energy, solving the issue of intermittency, and like we do with oil and gas, we can store it. This is particularly relevant to us, all Australians, given that 65% of all East Coast coal-fired power will disappear by 2035. Actually, not long away. The main constraint is the price of electrolyzers and renewable energy, and we all know both are falling. The electrolyzers we will make in Australia, starting in Gladstone, will cost a fraction of what they do in Europe. We have the technology to achieve this. That's why business people and industrialists around the world are moving. The chair of Hyundai Motor Group, a visionary called Usen Shung, who we are fiercely aligned with, recently announced that all vehicles of Hyundai will have hydrogen fuel cells, not by 2040, not by 2030, but by 2028, this decade. Another business leader I respect, Mukesh Ambani, Asia's richest bloke, is operating under a 1 + 1 + 1 principle. $1 for 1 kilogram of green hydrogen in 1 decade. Both leaders are global industry heavyweights. Both believe that green hydrogen is going to be, like I do, the world's future energy source. So it does kind of amaze me that a shrinking minority, thankfully of politicians increasingly isolated, with no experience and even less knowledge, argue the toss with businesses that have been the most successful in scaling up capacity and scaling down costs in the world. But as I always say, don't trust what a person says necessarily, trust what they do. So for Fortescue Future Industries, or FFI, securing 300 gigawatts of renewable resources in Africa, Asia, Central Asia, Europe, Latin America, New Zealand, and growing quickly here in Australia, over 4 to 5 times our current national capacity, is what I hope you would expect from us. And in our home country, we're taking the Green Energy Manufacturing Centre at Gladstone and replicating it across Australia at sites all over our country, creating the foundation for new industries in green ammonia, green iron, green steel, green fertilisers and green cement, with thousands of jobs at each location, having manufacturing coming roaring back to our country. In Perth, I also have a team who recently built the world's first hydrogen fuel cell haul truck. You see these old diesel-driven haul trucks at mine sites all over the world, but ours is powered by hydrogen. We also built a green-powered drill rig and a green ammonia-powered train and ship engine, and they did it all in 130 days. 130 days to start the next industrial revolution, to prove that we can do it, because we need no proof that the world needs it. And they did it. We're starting to manufacture our own hydrogen fuel cell drivetrains for our own trucks and making these drivetrains available to every truck supplier who wishes to pull their head out of the sand in the world. It's the future. This month, Fortescue also committed to net zero Scope 3 emissions by 2040. This Scope 3 target leads global industry. And we made it because we've done our homework. And now we're going hard after it. And this means that Fortescue must be carbon neutral to make this happen, even 10 years earlier, by 2030. Take, say, all 8 of our 330-metre long bulk carriers. Take our hundreds of trucks, our dozens of trains, our dozens of power stations. Everything must be running on green, renewable ammonia, hydrogen or green electricity by 2030, only a few years away. And it also means that by 2030, we need to have developed a method to help our customers make green steel. We will do this by producing, right here in Australia, once again, with green iron ore, and if the technology keeps going the way it looks, with even green iron. But definitely making the green hydrogen to refine their ore in their countries into green steel, all without that problem child that turned the seaborne iron ore industry into Russia for carbon, coal. Ladies and gentlemen, green hydrogen is the real solution. Not the fake hydrogen, not blue or grey, the real stuff, green. Every political leader I've spoken to this week, from Barnaby Joyce to Scott Morrison, has acknowledged that we need energy alternatives and we need them quickly. I must admit, even mudslinging, I may be wrong, Matt Canavan admits that all Australians, at least, he admits this, deserve a choice. There will never be a better time, with just 2 weeks before COP26, for all parties, Matt, Scott, Barnaby, everybody, the Labor Party, come on in, Greens, get with us, to show unity and give Australians the choices they want and that they deserve. And our Prime Minister, please, sir, be at COP26. We need our leadership to be selling Australia's massive green energy potential at COP26, not be a cop-out at home. Carbon neutrality by 2050 gives us all the choice now, rather than waiting till 2050 when we'll have no choice at all. If we don't make decisions now, policymakers in foreign countries will understandably make it for us. And the rules will not be on our own terms because we weren't even in the game in the first place. It's reasonable, it's not a conspiracy, they're just acting logically. So I say to our country's leaders, you have two choices. Do nothing as global warming sets in, desertify our country, or allow local entrepreneurs, homegrown institutions and multinationals made here to invest in our country going green instead of being forced to follow that economic opportunity overseas because it wasn't here in Australia. So let me give the last word, you might say ironically, in his words, to the leader of the National Party. I caught up with him for a casual beer or two, 3, in Tamworth this week, but Barney got pretty serious over breakfast the following day. It's the economic argument that I'm listening to, Twiggy, he said. I might be a cynic about the capacity to fix global warming, but I'm a believer in economic opportunities presented by it. And I see how it can add to Australia's economic position, and I can see how it grows our regions. I'll be fine if you want to quote that, Twiggy. Spot on, Barney. Thanks for the quote, mate. Australia, let's crack on, let's get on with it. Thank you.
Andrew Forrest, thank you very much for your speech. Heaps of really interesting details to get through, which we'll come to in the questions. But let me just start by asking you about net zero. We're all really sweating on what happens within the Morrison government over the next week as they contemplate adopting or not adopting this target. You've spoken to both Scott Morrison and Barnaby Joyce. In your view, do you believe Scott Morrison wants to formally adopt this target, and what is standing in his way?
Look, I think there's a whole heap of discussions. There's probably people trying to cut deals hither and thither, using political pressure for economic opportunity. I think to me, and it must be, if you've really got our national interest at stake, all over bar the shouting. I believe that Scott and Barney and even those members of the National Party, they actually get it, but they're milking this fear-mongering cow. Just a few, as I said, increasingly rarefied politicians of fear, and they've just got to get over that. The fact that they're still selling fear and not selling the huge and now obvious economic opportunity that carbon neutrality presents to our country. Mate, get out of the road is my message.
All right, we have a long list of journos who are zooming in today to ask a question of Andrew Forrest, and we'll begin with Catherine Murphy from The Guardian.
Hello, Dr. Forrest. Thanks for the address. If, in fact, the Nationals refuse to adopt a net zero target over the coming days, and that is a possibility, what would your advice to Scott Morrison be? Should he proceed without that agreement, even if it means splitting the coalition?
Look, my advice to our Prime Minister is to proceed. I do believe that if there's holdouts in the National Party, that the truth of my investment, other people's investment, and what the world is doing and how the world is moving will become increasingly clear. And there's nothing like a politician to react to what their voters think. They might not be leading them now, they might be just politicking now, but people and Aussies will see through it. And when they're the cop-out politicians, when they see that their votes are declining, you'll see them change pretty quick too.
Okay, our next question is from Sarah Ison at the West Australian.
Thank you for your speech, Mr. Forrest. I just had a question regarding WA's renewable hydrogen strategy, which of course they launched in 2019. In that strategy, they wanted to be the major exporter of hydrogen in the future. Do you think that's still possible given New South Wales' recent investment? And do you think that investment actually raises the bar for our state of WA and they need to be doing more for hydrogen, putting more investment in and really pumping it up?
Yeah, look, I see two governments who talk a really big game. One is Chile, the other is the state government of Western Australia. And I have to say, Alana McTiernan, Roger Cook, they're kind of lone voices saying we've just got to get on with this until Western Australia works out how to give people who want to develop large green hydrogen projects some security to get on and do it. Then we're going to continue dithering. And even though we've all got the best will in the world in Western Australia, and even though we have a Labor government who's fully committed to carbon neutrality, actually it's just words. We now need the actions. If you want to develop the hundreds of thousands of jobs in Western Australia, then you've got to get past the words, you've got to get past the rhetoric, you've got to get past the promises and allow projects to be developed by granting tenure so that people can crack on.
Next question, Greg Brown at The Australian.
Hello, Mr. Forrest. You've spoken about Scope 3 emissions in the iron ore industry. What's your view of Australia's responsibility for Scope 3 emissions in the coal and gas sectors? Currently, the position of both parties is that while there's a market for thermal coal and LNG, Australia should continue to sell it. Do you think that's appropriate, or would you like to see Australia adopt new policies? Malcolm Turnbull, for example, has suggested a moratorium on new coal mines. Or would you like to see more regulations around taking climate change into account for coal, thermal coal exports and LNG?
Yeah, look, I don't think it really matters that much what the government thinks, either government across Australia. What I think, actually, it doesn't matter that much. What matters is what our customers think. And they've made it really clear. They want to see us move to renewable electricity, renewable hydrogen. They want solutions for coal. They want us to provide them with green hydrogen so they have the choice, which I've advocated so long, should be made to every Australian. But also, why I think we don't matter that much as governments or entrepreneurs is because the big financiers are also saying, hey, we're pulling out. We have punters looking at us to make a quid too. We're getting out because Australia's not going to be a great investment because they're not doing something about getting real with their own carbon emissions. So yes, I think for the responsibility of every kid in Australia who's going to inherit a global warming world, if we do nothing, then I think we need to take into account carbon emissions in everything we do. Now, if you think, oh, no, we shouldn't do that, oh, that's terrible, that's uneconomic, mate, pick up the phone or walk into your kid's room and say, what do you think, darling? And they'll say, this is what I think. Fix it, Mum. Fix it, Dad. Take it into account.
All right, Pablo Vinales from SBS is our next questioner.
Dr. Forrest, thank you so much for your address. You've spoken optimistically about net zero by 2050. What about in terms of the medium-term target, 2030? What target do you think the government needs to set for that to give industry confidence and clarity? And secondly, there are reports that the government is looking at adopting a projection as opposed to a target. Will that suffice in your view?
Look, you're breaking up a little bit, Matt. We should have a beer over this, like I did with Barnaby, so we can really look each other in the eyes, so I get it. But all I can say is I do think that that we've got to crack on here. We've got to make the decisions. We need to. We've got to bring in the regulations and policies that we must do to ensure that we go carbon-free by 2050. 2030 is that all-critical milestone. Are you all talk or are you action? That's what 2030 means. When I was in Japan recently and the 46% down on 2020 carbon emissions came into Japan. Mate, you should have seen the steel companies and the coal-fired power stations walking in and saying, we don't know how to fix this. And what I heard is, this is Australia's opportunity. We said, well, how you fix it is by taking green iron and green iron ore from Australia. That'll bring your percentages down by more than 46% by 2030. Or if you're a coal-fired power station, who can fix a coal-fired power station? Actually, Australia can. We can make green ammonia, which can go straight into a coal-fired power station to at least 50%. Right now, dropping those carbon emissions by at least 50% right now. So what I heard in all that fear was Australia's great economic opportunity. So I would tend to argue that getting towards a 40 to 50% reduction on 2020 emissions by 2030 is going to have that really strong economic push for our country.
And Andrew Forrest, just to pick up on the second question that Pablo was asking there, I think he cut out a bit. The Morrison government is contemplating whether to nominate a new 2030 target or simply say that it is projected to beat its existing target of reducing emissions by 26 to 28% by 2030. If they are saying we're going to beat that by X amount of percent, would that be acceptable to you, or should they actually be nominating a new formal medium-term target?
No, look, if you don't nominate a target, all of us in business don't know what to aim for. It's like having an Olympics without medals. I mean, you can talk all you like, but unless you're going to aim to win the race, you're probably not going to win it. So I would say nominate a target and let business go for it. Unleash the power of business with your certainty, because you nominated a target. Ask any business person, ask any investor, don't listen to me. The worst thing we can have to make investment decisions and business decisions is uncertainty. Remove the uncertainty, nominate a target for 2030 and let Australia crack on and go for it.
All right, the next is Eliza from the ABC in your home state of Western Australia.
Dr. Forrest, thank you for your speech. I've got two questions, if I may. The first, following up on Sarah Ison's question, there are communities in Western Australia who are absolutely keen to get on with this hydrogen boom. I know you've been talking to some of them about plants here. When they heard the Gladstone announcement, there was a gasp. They thought, oh no, we've missed out. What guarantees can you give them that there will be opportunities here in WA, and how much, I guess, of a handbrake is what you're talking about with that 10-year issue? And secondly, you have amassed a huge and impressive fortune in the business of digging iron ore out of the ground. Why should people listen to you on this? You're really convincing. You can hear the passion, but you're not an energy provider. I know you've got Squadron Energy that's just started, but where is your expertise in this? Why should people trust you?
Okay, thank you. Great questions. So let's just talk about the communities who gasped when they saw that major investment into Gladstone, and do they want guarantees that we will be able to repeat those opportunities and bring those tens of thousands of jobs directly and indirectly back into their communities, into our state? I cannot guarantee that. All I can do is my absolute best. My shareholders want nothing more from me than to put everything on the line to make it happen. But if the government doesn't provide the pathways, like Queensland has done, like New South Wales has done, like South Australia is doing, then there's nothing I can do. I can just knock my head against a brick wall. But if they're not going to open the door, there's nothing I can do. But I will do my best as a West Australian to build Western Australia. I love our state. I love the fact it's full of hardworking, entrepreneurial fellow West Australians. But the government has actually got to get off its COVID tail and make it happen. Not talk about it, not wish it into existence. They've actually got to make it happen like the other state governments are doing. Would I have preferred to have had our first in Western Australia? Certainly, I would have. But it wasn't possible. And I've written to the Premier in increasingly strident terms saying, mate, we can't wish this into existence. You're either going to do it or not. Your next question. I really love this one. So people who don't produce a lot of carbon might feel really great about themselves, but in the global warming battle, they're not actually that interesting. They can take up a lot of newspapers and they can get a lot of accolades from people like you. But if they go green and the community's relying on them, but they don't produce any carbon anyway, I'd say give them a slow clap. The people we really need to go green who community and society relies on are the heavy carbon emitting, big manufacturing, heavy industry sectors. We need them to go green. So if you give them a hard time and say, oh, well, no, you're a hypocrite or whatever, just remember, global warming comes from them and the solution is with them. So why I'm putting everything on the line is that I built up a great company when I was not aware, like all of us, how severe global warming was. But perhaps not like all of us, I started to really look hard at hydrogen 11 years ago. I wanted to understand global warming 5 years ago, where it really is hurting, which is in our oceans. 99% of the world's livable space is in our oceans. That's where it's hurting worst, and I worked that out in a 4-year PhD, and then I wanted to work out, is there really a solution? Is there enough natural renewable energy in the world to power the Anthropocene many thousands of times forever? The answer is yes. Now, I'm making my company, if you like, the one out the front with the arrows in the back. People like you can shoot them. But if companies like us do not lead the way, then the heavy industry world will not follow and global warming will continue. So, yes, as a heavy carbon emitter, I've admitted that straight away in my Boyer lecture, Confessions of a Carbon Emitter. But you need, I need, all of us need heavy carbon emitting companies to go green as soon as possible. Let's push them along.
Next is Mike Foley from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age.
Thanks for your address, Dr. Forrest. You've said that you're backing green hydrogen with billions of dollars, and Fortescue Future Industries is aiming for 15 million tonnes of green hydrogen production by 2030. So on the practicalities of that ambition, that's going to, roughly require the equivalent of around 10 times the Asian renewable energy hub that's in the planning. It's a vast physical construction job that's required, and on current processes, it'd be very ambitious to assume that the development approvals from state and federal governments would be available within that sort of time frame on its own. Are there enough minerals in the ground that can be produced in that time frame to construct that scale of wind and solar renewable generation? Is it practical to aim that big, and how will you achieve it?
Okay, look, a fantastic question, and very fair that you asked it. With everything I've done, and look, other people do it other ways, but how I do it is I start with, what does the world need? What are the biggest gaps? What is most urgently required? Back in 1998, 1999, I was visiting China, I was visiting the developing world and thinking, oh my goodness, there's 1 billion plus people who are really going to get cracking here, who are going to want a standard of living similar to ours, and they're going to need huge amounts of materials, particularly iron ore. So I set out to build an iron ore company. In exactly the same way, looking into the future here, I'm saying that the world will need at least several times just 15 million tonnes of green hydrogen by 2030, but no one will move first that I can see. They're all talking about it, they're all concerned about it, they're all making big promises and the like, but who's actually moving? And I know how business operates. One person moves, then everyone piles in. So I decided to be the first mover, and I put on the table a 15 million tonne target. I am sure that the materials and the will and the energy and the workforce is there to make it happen. But am I sure that it can all happen in Australia? That I'm not sure of. I'm not sure of the collective government's will to be able to realise, like Einstein said, you define insanity, hoping for a different result, doing it the same way. We need, for a green hydrogen industry, to really follow what I've seen happening in South Australia, Queensland, New South Wales, change things around so you can really welcome in the huge green hydrogen future sector. And that's what I'm asking for all Australian governments, because I do not want us to be left behind in the race. As I've said, I've travelled to over 50 countries to really understand what's going on, to see if there really truly is the ultimate solution, a commercial solution to global warming, the solutions to the massive problems I understood in my PhD, And I firmly believe, yes, this is Australia's opportunity. This is Australia's government opportunity. It's Australia's state government opportunity. Let's give it to Australians and let's get after it.
Georgia Moore from the AAP.
Thank you, Dr. Forrest. If I may take you into a slightly different issue away from climate, how do you think Australia's trade and diplomatic relationship could be repaired with China? And how do you rate the federal government's handling of it, especially given the AUKUS Pact has had added kind of fuel to the fire? And also, if I may tack on another question to the end of that, what is your view on the potential of iron ore being drawn into the trade dispute? Or are you more concerned about other market forces that have caused prices to drop recently?
Georgia, what a huge segue. Look, I don't think I'll comment on international politics, but I can say that's really what it is. I think both countries need to realise they need each other. They've been good mates for a long time. What I've always found with China is that you sort things out behind closed doors. You go and see them, they come and see you. You can slam your fist on the boardroom table, but you don't do it while the camera's filming. And I think, and same, the Chinese do the same thing. They get really hysterical like our own people can as well. I'd say, take it all behind closed doors. Let's all sort it out as adults and let's remove the seemingly unproductive issues between us. And I think that is going to happen. I think there's a will in Australia and China. We just have to determine that will. And I do think that in the end, we will sort this out because the alternative is unthinkable. Second, what was your second question? I'm sorry.
We've lost Georgia from the Zoom, so we might have to just move on to the next journo anyway, because we're sadly running out of time. But Mark Ludlow is standing by from the Fin Review.
Dr. Forrest, thanks for your speech today. I know you've been on your sort of East Coast green hydrogen tour of Australia this week. It was good to see the announcement about the electrolyser factory in Gladstone. There's been a lot of talk about hydrogen between governments, with them clambering over themselves to sign MOUs, but it was good to see someone actually putting some money on the table. I know New South Wales announced this week about they've got $3 billion incentives on offer. Has that convinced you or FFI to actually contemplate building a green hydrogen project in New South Wales?
Yeah, look, it actually does. There are a lot of clever things in all of that, such as the ability to connect into the state electricity grid system, because our ability to export green hydrogen is on the coast, but New South Wales' ability to make all the electricity to fire into hydrogen is often in the hinterland. So having a large grid, which is fully paid off with all that capital sunk, having that able to be economically connected into hydrogen projects really does make real a hydrogen future for New South Wales. And when we wanted to build a dual fuel importation facility and a dual fuel initially power station, switching all to hydrogen, and our discussions were, we want to make Sydney the world's first major city which goes fully green. That is something which it will be absolutely historical and great business for everyone in New South Wales. All I got was a wall of support. And look, it's risky capital. It's going to be super hard work, but the reward is so necessary for all of us. We actually need to succeed.
Lawrence Arthur from the Swiss National Daily News and the president of the Foreign Correspondents Association.
Thank you, Dr. Forrest, for your presentation. What is your comment on Australia's image overseas? Australia has a bad image internationally and in Europe in particular. You mentioned Europe and the energy crisis, but Australia's commitment to fight climate change is poorly perceived. What if Australia misses the train? You suggest that the green future is in the hands of the private sector. That's the case of Australia?
Okay, look, thank you. Great question. I'm really glad that you make all those points because they're obviously criticisms of me as a leader, which I cop because I deserve it. You know, and it probably needed you to point out that Australia is really unpopular overseas because people need to understand that that is the truth. You know, we're all cosy here in Australia. The sun's shining, the wind's blowing, we've got a great standard of living, but we're not taking advantage of those huge, permanent, everlasting natural resources to help both global warming end and our own economy to rise. And all I can say is, yep, cop it. We actually deserve to be looked on poorly from around the world, but don't judge us for yesterday, judge us for tomorrow. If we go hard and commit to global warming neutrality by 2050 at COP26, I don't think you're going to see a country who will perform as quickly, who will turn the J-curve faster than Australia. And I really do, I'm immensely proud of my fellow Australians and my country. Once we finally decide, oh my God, crack on, let's decide it. But once we finally decide, you will see a nation which is the most responsible, the most powerful and the most committed to ending global warming through economic hard rationalism.
Amanda Kopp from the Community Radio Network.
Dr. Forrest, thank you so much for your speech. We've seen Bridget McKenzie from the Nationals this week say that many clean energy jobs are a mirage, referring to the fact that often these jobs are created in the construction of things like solar and wind, and then they kind of drop off when they actually start operating. Can you guarantee that that kind of thing won't happen when it comes to the hydrogen industry, particularly when it comes to regional areas?
Yeah, look, I'm really disappointed to hear Bridget say that because Bridget attended by Zoom the breakfast we had with Barnaby. She heard the facts and figures. She saw there's nothing like serious reality in $1 billion down on the table to start building manufacturing centres, not just hooking up a solar panel into the national grid, but manufacturing centres to make electrolyzers, which are desperately needed all over the world, right in her national's backyard. So, look, I'm surprised and disappointed to hear that. I'd say it's just probably rolling out a Patsy old line, you know, one which used to work months and months ago. In today's future, where changes come suddenly, I'd just say to Bridget, hey, Bridget, that might have worked on voters a little while ago when they had no clue. But you can't kid all the people all the time, Bridget. And now Australians are getting a clue. We know that there's huge economic growth and opportunity in a green future. The world is going to go green, period. That's a fact. Whether or not Australia's part of it, Bridget, will be up to people like you. So what about, Bridget, you listen to the facts and you get your electors and your voters to come with us on this magnificent journey to green Australia and to grow our economy and to have jobs for every single national voter.
All right, Barbara Barkhausen, German freelance foreign correspondent in Australia.
Thank you for your speech, Dr. Forrest. I would like to sort of follow up a little bit on what Lawrence asked in terms of Australia's reputation overseas, which has clearly been harmed by the government's denial of climate change. Almost, how do you see, or what potential do you see that the hydrogen initiative can create, and also in terms of the export markets? Can it mend bridges between countries again, for example?
Yeah, look, thank you. Thank you. I certainly believe it can. I deserve the whipping I'm getting. I should send you an RM Williams stock whip. They're really good because I should cop it. If I could move my country along earlier, I would have. But I do think, and I'm really earnest about this, I do think that when we go carbon neutral 2050, and I hope and pray it's by COP26 and that our dear Prime Minister attends, that you will see a country which will perform quicker than any other country, and we will fully redeem the intransience and the indecision and the dithering which the world has put up with for so long in Australia. Now, we might be late to the game, but it's provided we get there by the finish line, COP26. In a couple of weeks' time, you'll see a very fast nation out of the blocks, and you can rely on Australia to deliver because we always have.
Okay, we have 2 more questions, Andrew Forrest, if you don't mind hanging around for just a little bit longer. Michael Keating from Keating Media.
Michael Keating from Keating Media, Dr. Forrest. A small modular nuclear reactor could be built within 18 months that would power a city, and Australia is about to embark on having a nuclear submarine fleet. Do you think nuclear power has to form part of the solution?
Thanks, Michael. A great question. Look, I've looked at nuclear power for about 20 years. Bill Gates and I have and Bill's done a lot more of it than I have. He's quite a fan. Looked at how to recycle uranium nuclear waste. And look, it's on the cusp of success. Maybe keep it in the mix, but I ask you, Michael, to take this into account. In my decade or 2 of studying uranium, thorium, nuclear waste as a source of power, the safest was thorium, because no matter which way you worked it, you couldn't crack it into a nuclear weapon. With uranium, you can crack it into a nuclear weapon. It's almost impossible to get out of the process flow sheet of a nuclear power station a point where you can take the enriched uranium and turn it into a weapon. And so I feel, yeah, you could get a cleaner world, not as clean as a green hydrogen solution for sure, it won't be as clean, but you'll get a cleaner world, but you'll get a lot more dangerous world. And when you see Al-Qaeda blowing up their own fellow believers in Afghanistan, where I was only last year, and you know, you see all things which are totally unpredictable, then I say let's keep nuclear weapons out of the everyday person's hands because they're just dangerous. And you can do that by not proliferating nuclear power everywhere, and you can do that by going to green renewable energy, which won't harm anyone.
And our last question today from Jared Coburn from the Canberra Times.
Thank you, Dr. Forrest, for taking my question, which is the last one of the day. I just wanted to kind of ask, in terms of future kind of government policy response in supporting, say, a future energy market around green hydrogen, if there is no support by the Commonwealth, what implications would that have for the industry's viability?
Jared, if there's no support by the Commonwealth, then we'll continue working through the states, but the future will not be as strong for any state or territory in Western Australia without that support of the Commonwealth. So what would happen, Jared, to be brutal, is that investors like us who will still know that global warming is real and that we have to do something about it, we'll have to take our investments, our technologies, our ideas to those countries who will strongly welcome us and who will lay out the carpet to allow us to develop great green hydrogen projects to move the world on from global warming for our shareholders. So it'll still happen. Jared, a good question, but it won't happen at the same pace or may not happen in Australia.
All right, well, on that note, Andrew Forrest, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much for your address today and for answering all of our questions. As a token of our appreciation, the National Press Club will be sending you a membership in the mail, which will grant you access to a whole bunch of press clubs around the world when we can actually travel once again. But as well as thanking you, I wanted to thank all of the journalists who have Zoomed in today. It's a bit of a technical feat that the ABC is pulling off with the Press Club. And thanks for helping us continue to bring you Press Club addresses during lockdown. And on that note, we'll leave it there from the National Press Club of Australia, hosted from the ABC studios.